What really increased the interest in forestry in northern Wisconsin was when the paper mills finally figured out they could use aspen to make paper. Prior to the late 40s or early 50s, most paper was made from spruce and balsam. At some point, the paper company chemists went into the lab and they came out with a recipe for allowing aspen to be used to make paper products as well as newsprint. And because there was an abundance of aspen in the area, a logging gold rush, so to speak, was on. In the early days, when the farmers or loggers that had jobs in the local town could drive to work, they could haul in a pickup load of aspen, bring it to the mill, get paid for it, and then go on to their regular jobs. When I was 15 or 16 years old, in those days, my father would buy tax forfeited land from Douglas County, log it off, and then let it revert back to the county for back taxes. At that time, he ended up with one 40-acre parcel that for some reason he couldn't log, and he was simply going to let it revert for back taxes back to the county. And on a whim, I offered to buy it and pay the back taxes. So at 15 years old, I became a property owner. Most 15 or 16-year-olds would be thinking about buying a car, and I guess I was too, but my priorities even back then were to own some woodland in northern Wisconsin. And I guess that's how I finally got started in forestry. Living Forest Co-op, to begin with, is a for-profit cooperative. So we're actually out there to make some money. But I think we want to do it in a sustainable fashion. And we want to put equal value on the ecology of the forest as well as the economic side. Our focus are weighted a little bit more toward the ecological side than the economic side. One of the things I've kind of discovered about our membership is it's divided into two groups of people. One group are like me. We're older. We probably have a little less education. Financially or economically, we're a little poorer, but we're land rich because we've been here forever. The other group of people are those that have come in from Minneapolis, St. Paul, Chicago, the larger metropolitan areas, and maybe they've had a tie to northern Wisconsin for whatever reason. Maybe they camped or vacationed here, and at some point they decided they wanted to own a piece of their dream, so they bought forest land in northern Wisconsin. That's particularly true now that lake property is becoming more and more out of the reach of many individuals. Wooded land is the next priority. And particularly with this group that are newcomers to the area, they have both the financial resources, the education, and the desire to do something productive and positive with their land. And they're going to look around and they're going to see they have these choices. They can go to a private forestry consultant, they can go to the state, a governmental agency, or they can come to us. And quite often they turn to us simply because of our values, or at least I hope they do. And I think the same thing applies to the local landowners to some extent, although in many ways they're a tougher sell simply because they've been here forever and they don't think they need a professional to manage their land. You know, they've been doing it for years, or their father, their grandfather, and they seem to be getting along just fine. So one of our jobs, I think, is to convince these local woodland owners that there is a place for professional forest management in their future and try to encourage them to participate in that sort of action. One of the things that have caught my interest is alternative fuels, and the simplest alternative fuel around here is the sale of firewood. Living Forest Co-op is a service-based organization in the sense that we provide forest management services. I've been trying to focus on developing a slightly different path, maybe not one that overtakes the services, but provides another income stream, and that is the sale of firewood bundles. It's a modest beginning, but it's something I think that we could expand, and it kind of goes along to the value-added philosophy we have regarding selling timber products. We planted white spruce, white pine, yellow birch, some white cedar. And while the intent is not to completely restore the forest to these species, I simply can't afford to do that. It is an opportunity to return a seed tree stocking base of these species that are now absent and return them to the forest. So maybe not even the next generation, but a couple of generations down the road, there will be at least a smattering of white pine and species that were here originally at the turn of the century. Now, as I'm getting older and starting to think about my legacy and what I'm going to do with this property, I've tried to do a couple of things. And one is I've put a conservation easement on the property so that it can no longer be developed. It will have to remain intact, and it will remain a working forest. And one of the movers behind that is, as I was growing up, it was quite common for boys my age at the time to wander over miles and miles of uninterrupted woodland in Douglas County and the surrounding counties without fear of being worrying about trespass or violating someone else's property rights. Those days, unfortunately, are gone. And by retaining this little piece of woodland, if nothing else, my grandchildren will have an opportunity to experience to some extent the same thing I did growing up. At first, when they discovered that I had, through the Wisconsin Land Trust, put a conservation easement on my land, they were a little bit upset. You know, Grandpa, you mean we can't cut wood, we can't build on it, we can't do this, we can't do that? And they've slowly come to the realization that, you know, maybe that's not such a bad idea after all, that we will have a place to practice forestry. We can cut firewood, we can gather berries or boughs or whatever might come along. An interesting story that relates to our family history is, at least as I understand it, how my grandfather arrived in Maple, Wisconsin. He was probably a draft dodger from Finland, leaving Finland to avoid being drafted into the Finnish army. His parents scraped together enough money to buy him ship passage to the United States. On the way over, there must have been a storm at sea because the ship was diverted from New York, and he ended up being disembarking in Montreal, Canada. Landing in Montreal in a strange country, very little money, and unable to speak a word of English, he had to make his way across Canada and over to northern Wisconsin. And I guess, as I understand it, what he did is he would walk the streets of Montreal and listen at doorways to restaurants and taverns. And when he found someone that could speak Finnish, he would go in and ask them for help and advice, and they would eventually point him on his way to northern Wisconsin. I know that when he arrived here, he got off the train and he looked around, and all he saw was the devastation from the cutover. Stumps, brush, burning slash piles, bare hills, and no forests. Nothing like he had left in Finland. Or my dad telling me that he had said that he was so depressed at what he saw that if he would have had the money, he would have gone back on the train and returned to Finland.